Kansas City, Missouri, spread before Cassandra Hughes like an open book. Its hustle and bustle a stark contrast to the eerie quietude that enveloped the old stone orphanage. This looming fortress of archaic brick and mortar, nested within an otherwise animated city, whispered tales of neglect, of forgotten tragedies and abandoned hopes. Cassandra was of a peculiar sort. Her presence breathed life into any setting. She was young, her brown eyes capturing the world in their vast depths, her slender frame a silent testimony to a war fought against her body, her existence. Yet her steady gaze held a determination that belied her years. The orphanage's antiquated gates creaked in the wind, the gnarled iron grating a melancholic symphony. As she stepped into the compound, a shiver ran down her spine. She cast a glance around, the neatly trimmed gardens, the towering willows standing sentinel, their leaves rustling like whispered secrets. Everything was perfectly ordinary except it wasn't. The door to the orphanage opened with an aching groan, revealing Mrs. Finch, the matron, a specter of a woman cloaked in an aura of disquiet. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Detective Hughes?" she greeted, her voice carrying the chill of the orphanage walls. "Mrs. Finch," Cassandra nodded, mirroring the hollow formalities. They exchanged pleasantries, but she noticed the matron's gaze flitting away now and then, as if she were expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. As they walked down the orphanage's eerie corridors, she tried to engage the matron in conversation. "It must be hard," she said, "taking care of so many children." Mrs. Finch's expression tightened. "We do our best, detective. These children, they've been dealt a cruel hand." "I understand," Cassandra said, her mind wandering back to her own battle with an eating disorder, the way it had clawed at her sanity, her sense of self. She knew all too well the silent struggle that lurked beneath normalcy. It was her past trauma that fueled her current resolution, to seek justice for those too young, too vulnerable to fight their battles. Their conversation, however, was abruptly interrupted. An unseen weight fell upon her as the surroundings blurred and an alien darkness seeped into their reality. In the brief, terrible moment that followed, she saw, not with her eyes, but with something far older, far more primal. There were figures, terrible cosmic entities wreathed in shadow, their forms a grotesque parody of reality. And then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the vision ended. She found herself standing in the dim corridor of the orphanage, the grim stillness broken only by the distant laughter of children. She looked at Mrs. Finch, who returned her gaze, oblivious to her experience. She grappled with what she had just witnessed, a chill settling in her heart. She was at the beginning of a descent into a world far removed from what she had known. The line between the ordinary and the extraordinary irrevocably blurred. The cosmic horror of her vision, still etched onto her retinas, promised a grim struggle as she ventured deeper into the heart of the familiar shadows. Kansas City hummed with life outside the walls of Cassandra's small, cluttered office, a stark contrast to the grim stillness that loomed in her memory. The room was a sanctuary, her desk laden with clues to the kidnappings, photographs of the missing children pinned to a corkboard. But the most perplexing artifact lay spread out under her gaze, an intricate pattern of arcane symbols she discovered at the kidnapping sites. The symbols were complex, their meaning as elusive as the shifting shadows of her vision. A dizzying array of spirals, intersecting lines, and ominous circles. They seemed to throb with an unnatural pulse. She found her gaze drawn into the pattern, into the abyssal depth that promised to reveal its cryptic message. As she traced the symbols, the echoes of her past re-emerged. She was a seasoned warrior in her fight against the eating disorder, having battled the relentless specter of self-perception, control, and desperation. It had nearly consumed her once, yet it was this past struggle that steeled her against the horror she now faced. The fear etched in the faces of the missing children resonated with her own past. She saw herself in their eyes, knew their despair, their silent pleading for someone to understand, to help. An insistent knock interrupted her reverie. Lieutenant Grayson, a stoic figure who had worked alongside Cassandra since her early days on the force, stood in the doorway. He held out a file, his lined face grave. "Another one," he said, his voice heavy. She took the file, her heart sinking. Another child gone. More symbols. The circle of horror was growing, its edges seeping into her world, tugging her deeper into the abyss. She shared her growing suspicions with Grayson, the theories she was piecing together from the symbols and the eerie visions that plagued her. He listened, his brows furrowed, his gruff exterior unable to mask his concern for her. As night descended on the city, she found herself at the mercy of her visions again. The shadows in her room twisted and morphed, cosmic horrors slipping into the corners of her reality. But this time, instead of fear, she felt a kind of understanding. A dreadful connection was forming between her and the arcane symbols. As though the universe was unraveling its secret horrors, each thread intertwined with her destiny. The vision passed, leaving her trembling in the silence of her office. She was standing at the precipice of a terrible truth, one that threatened to blur the lines of reality. With a sense of resolve hardened by her past struggles, she prepared to dive deeper into the world of cosmic horror. What had begun as an investigation had spiraled into a fight against otherworldly forces, her path inexorably leading her back to the stone edifice of the orphanage. A dread-filled abyss yawned open before her, beckoning her to step into the eclipsed reality that awaited. The Kansas City dawn broke, casting long skeletal shadows against the facade of the stone orphanage. Cassandra stood before the looming edifice, the reality of her waking world blending seamlessly with the ghastly visions of her dreams. The orphanage, once a refuge for the abandoned and the lost, now loomed as a nexus of cosmic horror. The arcane symbols etched into its heart seemed to pulsate with a macabre life of their own. She felt an odd sensation of trepidation, not for herself, but for the matron, Mrs. Finch. The woman was unknowingly entwined in a labyrinth of cosmic horror, a puppet to otherworldly forces she barely understood. She found herself pitying the woman, her plight a grotesque mirror to her own past struggles. As she journeyed deeper into the heart of the orphanage, her visions blurred her reality. The solid walls of the building throbbed and pulsed, the earthly bricks and mortar surrendering to a grotesque, shifting mass of arcane symbols. Yet she trudged on, driven by a determination forged from her battle against her own inner demons. She found Mrs. Finch in the heart of the building, her body taut with an unreadable tension. A cryptic conversation ensued, the dialogues loaded with veiled threats and unanswered questions. The matron's fear-stricken eyes flickered towards Cassandra, a dreadful understanding dawning within them. I had to do it. For them. Mrs. Finch's voice trembled, her gaze fixated on a looming shadow in the corner of the room. For us. As the terrible truth unfolded, Cassandra's world spun. Mrs. Finch was no mere puppet, she was the puppeteer. She was behind the kidnappings, serving the cosmic entities, hoping to pacify them with the innocence of the orphan children. The horrific truth gnawed at her sanity, the underbelly of the ordinary world revealing a grotesque reality. The confrontation reached its climax as she found herself face to face with Mrs. Finch, the feeble light of the orphanage flickering between them, casting long and monstrous shadows. Each woman held the other's gaze, a chilling standoff that mirrored the larger, unseen struggle between the human and the cosmic. She was trapped in the heart of the eclipsed reality. The abyss was no longer a distant dread. She was within it, surrounded by its suffocating grasp. Yet amidst the descending chaos, she clung to the strength forged by her past, preparing herself for the final battle that loomed ahead. She was teetering on the brink of madness, yet she was resolute. She had stared into the abyss, and now the abyss was staring back. The chilling confrontation within the heart of the orphanage extended into the creeping twilight, a perverse dance between two opposing forces. On one side, Cassandra Hughes, the relentless detective driven by her personal demons; on the other, Mrs. Finch, the reluctant puppeteer entrapped in the tendrils of a cosmic horror. The walls of the orphanage seemed to close in on them, reality itself distorting in the presence of the unseen cosmic entities. Mrs. Finch's desperate justification echoed in Cassandra's ears, a grotesque lullaby in the twisted realm they inhabited. The woman's plight was a grotesque parody of her own fight against her eating disorder, both victims to powers beyond their comprehension. Yet while one had succumbed, the other had risen above, channeling her struggles into a beacon of strength. The darkness converged around them, a palpable presence, a monstrous entity fed by fear and despair. Mrs. Finch crumbled under its weight, her sanity shattering, her pleas fading into the cosmic chaos. But Cassandra stood firm, the terror not breaking but molding her. She was no longer a mere observer of the cosmic horror, but an active participant, a beacon of resistance against the invading darkness. Her words rang out against the smothering silence, clear and unwavering. "Enough, Mrs. Finch. You can still fight this. You can still resist." But Mrs. Finch was too far gone, lost to the abyss. With a final pleading look at Cassandra, she capitulated, allowing the darkness to consume her entirely. Her figure twisted and warped, reality contorting around her. And then she was gone, leaving only a hollow echo of despair. Cassandra was left alone in the heart of the orphanage, her reality consumed by the cosmic horror. Yet she stood her ground. She rallied against the encroaching darkness, her defiance a shining beacon against the overwhelming odds. In her heart, she carried the memory of her own fight against her eating disorder, the memory of her survival. "I will not yield," she proclaimed into the encroaching darkness, her voice echoing off the throbbing walls. In a final, climactic moment, she unleashed her inner strength, pushing against the overwhelming darkness. She faced the abyss, the cosmic horror that had consumed the orphanage, the city, her very reality. Yet she did not falter. In the deafening silence that followed, the darkness receded. She stood alone in the heart of the orphanage, the darkness replaced by the early morning light filtering in through the cracked windows. The cosmic horror was quelled, for now, held at bay by a single resolute woman. With the dawn, the city awoke, oblivious to the horrors that had transpired within the stone walls of the orphanage. Cassandra emerged, a lone figure against the morning sun. She had stared into the abyss, fought the cosmic horror, and prevailed. Yet her victory was a silent one, a testament to her personal strength and determination. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like it and subscribe to our channel, where you can find more similar stories, and click on the bell icon to never miss one. There is plenty more cosmic horror to come from the Eldritch Tales Factory. Stay tuned, and until next time.